Cuthbert Wheelwright was disliked by his fellow villagers from childhood. He was guilty from birth, for his father, Ireland Wheelwright, a carpenter and woodcutter, had married an unknown woman. No one in all of Worcestershire knew anything about her, not in Drip Hill, not in Grimsend, not even in Patcham itself. Alderman Garvin made a point of inquiring. Eolan was a recluse. He lived on the outskirts, knew no one well, and often disappeared into the woods for long periods. But he was a master of his craft. Wood seemed to melt in his hands, and he could mold it into whatever he pleased. At the Patcham fairs, his pieces were snapped up in a flash, no matter that he asked 10 shillings for some. Wheelwright knew no shortage, earning a living from his craft, much to the envy of his less skilled neighbors. And when the carpenter brought the beautiful Janet into the house, the villagers decided she was a non-human, a Zeligan, those fairies with a comely visage, for what human girl of such beauty would have coveted the sullen Iolan? Perhaps Janet, though considered a Zeligan, would have settled into the village, but it didn't work out that way. The carpenter's house, built in the very outskirts, stood right by the creek, far from the well. All the women carried water from there and scrubbed their laundry in a tub. But Janet, you see, rinsed right there in the river. Not good. Then came the worst. Whenever someone had a twinge in their side or a runny nose, they'd immediately remember Janet was just doing the laundry the other day, and rumors began to spread through the village that she was not a Zeligan, but a Benny, those same fairies who predict death by washing in the river. People began to fear her. They tried to avoid dealing with the wheelwrights unless absolutely necessary, avoiding them even more than before. And when Janet gave birth to her first child and thrashed about in a fever for 3 days, the herbalist didn't come to relieve the fever. The beautiful Janet died, but the villagers didn't forget what a Benny they considered her, continuing to shun Iolana and his son Cuthbert, and they even warned their children to avoid the wheelwrights. The carpenter died young, his son not yet 16. He took Iolana's place. Though very young, he was strong. He had been felling centuries-old tree trunks since he was 10, and he carved skillfully. He took after his father. He inherited his father's skill, strength, and unsociability, and his mother's beauty. Only if a girl gazed at this stern beauty would they immediately rebuke the foolish creature, saying, "This is not human beauty, but the impure sign of fairy blood." Years passed, and the villagers continued to avoid Cuthbert, out of the ill memory of his father and mother, and when he returned from the forest with a black puppy one day, they turned their backs on him altogether. Who in their right mind would keep a black dog when everyone knew that this accursed beast brought nothing but misfortune and misfortune? The people grumbled, especially Thomas the miller and John the barrel-maker's wife. Headman Garvin was forced to go to the carpenter. "Cuthbert," he said, "you'll ruin the whole village with your monster. Get rid of him before it's too late." The young carpenter looked at him sullenly and was silent for a long time. Then he said reluctantly, "What monster? An ordinary dog. Look, the one with one ear missing. Schleolan, he's called. I pulled him out of the pond as a torn puppy. I raised him and nursed him back to health. If you keep a beast warm and caring from infancy, will he really grow into a monster? The village elder disagreed. You're still young, foolish. You don't know everything. If you don't want to kill him, then drive him away before something bad happens. Cuthbert was silent even longer. Then he replied, When that dog appeared, I stopped howling out of melancholy and loneliness. Now I have someone to talk to, someone to care for. If I drive him away, I'll become a beast myself. Cuthbert didn't listen to the village elder. One-eared Schleoland stayed with him. When Cuthbert brought his wife home from who knows where, the villagers whispered, He's just like his father. Tweeren Wheelwright also washed clothes in the river, but they didn't consider her a Benny. The young people believed less in the old omens. Indeed, why would she drag herself to the well, hauling buckets of water, straining herself, when her house was right by the river? Besides, Tweeren was seen barefoot. She had normal feet, without the webbing of a goose, so she wasn't a Benny at all. And then Garvin the headman learned that Tweeren wasn't a stray at all, but an orphan from distant Monmouthshire. The villagers calmed down. For a while, they hoped that perhaps the young wife, since she wasn't a fairy, would fear the black Schleoland and insist that her husband get rid of the unclean beast, just to be on the safe side. But it didn't happen. Evil tongues whispered that she wouldn't have succeeded, even if she had wanted to. Miller Thomas reasoned, Everyone knows that a carpenter values his beast more than anything in the world. He talks to it as if it were a person, feeds it the best pieces, pats its neck tenderly, and strokes its muzzle affectionately, as if it were his own. Barrowman John's wife chimed in, and the dog follows him like a constant shadow, glaring at us like a wild beast. And even though many years had passed since Cuthbert's one-eared dog arrived and no misfortune had befallen him, the villagers still looked askance at the black beast. Cuthbert lived as before, toiling away, and the family not only knew no need, but even had plenty to spare. The neighbors were envious, saying, Why such blessings to a solitary man? Shouldn't good people have something to offer? But one day, a storm finally struck the village. A lightning-caused fire broke out. The village burned to the ground. The culprit was quickly found. Of course, only Cuthbert's house had survived, and the fire victims didn't care that it stood isolated, and therefore the fire hadn't reached it. They remembered everything: the fairy mother, the solitary father, the wife from elsewhere, and, of course, the black dog. They came to Cuthbert to demand justice for the dog. The elder Garvin in front, the miller Thomas, and the wife of the barrel maker John on either side, and half the village behind them. A young carpenter met them at the door, tall and strong, 100-year-old tree trunk himself, felling it so deftly. He gazed silently, determined and sullen. The men shuffled about, hesitating under his heavy gaze, and then dispersed without a word. Remaining in a place where misfortune had once befallen them was considered bad luck. They mourned, lamented, and then decided to move. Free grounds were nearby, on the other side of Creech Creek. True, they had long had a bad reputation, but remaining where misfortune had struck was even worse. Cuthbert decided against moving. Why bother? Living on the outskirts before and now, it was all the same as long as they could cross the river, especially since his wife had just given birth to a daughter, little Ethelyn. Where would he move with a newborn? But on the very first day the carpenter crossed to the other bank and began chopping down trees, hewing logs, and building walls. He worked tirelessly, day after day. A little over a month passed, and the village was built. Headman Garvin came over once to thank Wheelwright. He stood there, snoring, and remained silent. The carpenter fixed the last door and left silently, without saying anything himself or waiting for a word. Soon the villagers showed up at Wheelwright's house again. They pushed Headman Garvin forward. He, looking away, began, "We should establish a new churchyard in the new place, but the place seems unholy. The priest said we need a guard, a church guard." He hesitated, shifted his weight, and glanced sideways at Cuthbert. According to custom, a black dog without a single white hair must be buried in a newly consecrated cemetery to guard it from the devil. Otherwise, this difficult duty falls to the first corpse buried there. The carpenter's voice rang out hoarsely. And who guarded the old cemetery? Garvin was confused. What difference does it make? Barrelman John's wife stuck her head out. "Give me your dog." Cuthbert looked ill-natured. He remained silent. "You won't give it to me, will you?" the elder inquired sullenly. "I won't," the carpenter snapped. "You're living like a slob. You've gone completely wild," the crowd shouted. "Look, you didn't want to do it the easy way," Miller Thomas warned. Cuthbert turned and walked into the house, only to hear the heavy door slam. A week later, he was returning from the forest with Schleolan, and as he approached the house, he saw his wife, Tuirin, in tears. The villagers had come, taken the little Etty by force, and carried them away. Schleolan howled terribly, and the carpenter ran as fast as he could across Creech Creek toward the village. The dog followed him. At the elder's house, Cuthbert kicked down the door but didn't notice. His eyes were wild, and behind him a black dog bared its fangs, and it was hard to say which beast was more terrifying. There the miller, the barrel maker's wife, and the elder were already waiting for him. Garvin hid his trembling hands behind his back and said, "If you don't give up your dog, then your daughter will be the first to rest in our churchyard, and she will turn into a Grim. She will guard the cemetery from the devil, protect the surrounding area from evil fairies, and guide those lost in the forest. And she'll never see peace. It's up to you." The carpenter staggered. He stepped out onto the porch, and half the village had gathered in the yard. He looked at them with unseeing eyes, desperately clutched the dog Scruff, and staggered toward the new cemetery. He arrived, knelt before Schleolan, hugged his one-eared dog, and didn't rise for a long time. Curious villagers, peeping from afar, said he seemed to whisper something to his beast and wipe his face with his palms. But the dog sat quietly, looking at its owner and seeming to nod in agreement. Then Cuthbert pressed his forehead to the dog's, pulled a knife from his belt, and ran it across its black throat, gently, as if caressing it. He dug a hole, buried Schleolane, and went back. He was a terrifying figure, his hands covered in dirt, his shirt bloodied, and his eyes white and dead. The village was suddenly deserted, its doors closed. Only little Ethelyn lay on the ground by the well, her clothes all crumpled and wailing. And the next day, disaster struck. In broad daylight, right by Creech Creek, a huge monster appeared out of nowhere, the size of a 2-year-old calf. It was black and shaggy, with a long tail curled into a ring on its back, and had terrifying red eyes, the spitting image of a Barghest, the devil's dog. Only for some reason it had one ear. It tore the elder Gavarvin to shreds, and the dog, wearing church makeup, black, never showed up from the new churchyard. The Barghest howled terribly at night. People were afraid to show their faces. Everyone hoped it would go away. 9 days passed, and they realized it wouldn't go away on its own. They rushed to the priest. What should they do? The priest sighed heavily. Only one thing can destroy this monster, the prayers of a young mother. She must go out into the forest with her newborn in her arms and pray alone all night. The people exchanged glances. There was only one newborn in the entire village, Ethelyn Wheelwright. Who would dare go to the carpenter? He was now feared almost more than the monster. How Cuthbert learned of this is unknown. Only the next day, curious onlookers saw the carpenter in the evening twilight, carrying his wife across Creech Creek, while he himself carried little Etty in his arms. He led her to the edge of the new churchyard, handed her daughter to Tuiren, and then left. That night the monster howled even louder than before, terribly and mournfully. But as dawn broke, it died down. The carpenter, almost at first light, arrived at the churchyard, scooped up his wife and daughter, and carried them home. From that time on, the black Barghest was never seen again. Hunter Jack and the shepherd Cumhall suggested going to the Wheelwrights to thank them, but evil tongues quickly silenced them. Miller Thomas, now a headman, spoke, and Beryl John's wife chimed in. Cuthbert wasn't looking out for us. It's clear Schleolan had turned into his monster. He had one ear, and so did that Barghest. So the carpenter wanted to free him from the curse. He didn't spare his wife and daughter for the sake of that vile creature. He himself led them to be torn apart. So no one ever visited the house on the other side of Creech Creek. Hunter Jack only crept in once, at dusk. He stood on the porch, hesitated, but couldn't bring himself to knock. The years passed. It was quiet in the area. True, Beryl John's wife went mushroom picking once and never returned. People in the village became worried. They said, if the black dog didn't lead her out of the wilderness, it means the churchyard hasn't been adorned with church paint, protecting her from the devil. Cuthbert was also found guilty, and when the hunter Jack began to say that he had once gotten lost in the hills and had only reached the village because a black shadow loomed ahead of him and he had run after it, the headman Thomas hissed sternly at him, and the hunter fell silent. A couple of years later, Thomas disappeared. A week later, what was left of him was found in the forest, apparently mauled by a bear. His church makeup hadn't saved him. Almost no one in the village believed in him, except for the hunter Jack and the shepherd, Grim.Horror. He told his family that he had often found lost sheep by the barking of a dog. True, he never saw the dog itself. And one day, his little Lizzie returned from the forest with berries and said she had spotted a wolf in the thicket. Before she had time to panic, a black dog jumped out of nowhere and chased the beast away. But who would believe such childish tales? The wheelwrights continued to live in isolation. Tuiren rarely showed up in the village. Cuthbert never set foot on the other side of Creech Creek. However, if a villager dared ask for a table or a bench, they always obliged. On quiet evenings, the sound of children's laughter drifted to the outskirts of the village from the other side of Creech Creek. Cuthbert, who had fashioned a swing on a thick branch of a spreading spruce, was rocking the growing Althea on it. She sang like a sylph's bell, and those who happened to pass by the river bank at that moment swore they saw the reclusive carpenter smile. The wheelwrights never got a new dog. Strangers were rare in the Creech Creek area, perhaps only the occasional passing merchant or traveler. So, even though they hadn't seen them for a long time, they feared the evil fairies and wild animals more than strangers. And in vain. A human can be more terrifying than an evil spirit and more dangerous than a wolf. 4 bandit deserters were just such a person. They got lost in an unfamiliar forest, stumbled upon the creek, and decided to follow its current. Soon they smelled something living. Smoke drifted in. They came to a patch of woodland from where a lonely farmstead and huts on the other bank were already visible. But they didn't rush there right away because they noticed 2 young girls walking along the edge of a clearing. "We'll have a blast," they grinned. Mackenzie and Ruth, the daughters of the potter Evan, didn't notice the trouble. They weren't accustomed to fearing strangers. Cuthbert was just building a cart in the yard when he heard a girl's shrill cry. He glanced back at the windows of his hut. Yes, Tuiren and Etty were cooking something in the kitchen. He stood there for a moment, debating whether to go or not. He decided to see what had happened and grabbed his axe just in case. He walked slowly at first, but then broke into a run. He saw that an outrage was about to happen. One man with an axe against 4 chainmail-clad warriors. What was he thinking, Carpenter? He didn't have time. A black shadow darted from behind the trees, a red-eyed monster the size of a 2-year-old calf. It didn't charge, didn't howl. It merely bared its teeth and froze, glaring terrifyingly at the bandits. An inhuman terror overwhelmed them. They abandoned the girls and backed away, slowly backing up, never taking their eyes off the devilish beast. They reached the dense thicket, where they turned and fled as fast as they could, without looking back. When the speechless Cuthbert reached the edge of the forest, he saw only their backs. The girls were terrified, tears streaming down their cheeks. And next to them stood not a monster at all, but simply a dog, black and one-eared. He raised his shaggy head, looked at Cuthbert, and vanished into thick fog among the trees. The carpenter only managed to whisper, "Shleolan,"